Yeah, this is a weird topic which you are having on world peace. More of a United Nations topic than anything else. So I am looking at what is world peace and what is my contribution, whatever little contribution I have. Now, one of the issues which comes up is why is there conflict? Now, I'm not looking at, it's very easy to say because man is evil or mankind has got all kinds of evil in them. I don't want to look at those kind of solutions. I'm looking at the necessities. That means conflict is there because of a necessity, not because of any evil in man. So that's something which we need to recognize. And that is where we are working towards world peace, because it is a question of necessities and not a question of just evil. So basically what happens with scarcity of resources, there becomes a shortage of food. So in the early days, when you're looking at a hunter-gatherer stage, basically you had tribes living in the forests and they were living at peace till the population grew and they found that they are not able to have adequate food for themselves. So they start raiding the neighboring territory or taking food from the neighboring territory. And so territorial battles start with the population growth and tribal wars start taking place. But apart from population growth, there was also famine due to scarcity of rain and things like that. So when the famine takes place, the tribe which is affected by the famine will start looking for food and attacking the other tribes to get food. And then this kind of conflict starts growing in a spiral, and it becomes a problem. This kind of conflict need not only just take place between nations, but it can take place also between individuals. So what also happens that when this kind of shortage takes place, and it's a reality, then theft starts. People will start stealing from the other person. And the theft will also have its own consequences. Now, these thefts can be both nation stealing from nation, and it can be individuals stealing from individuals, but it all has its own consequences. And it causes more and more conflict as people resent the fact that they have been stolen from. And then they start reacting to the people who are stolen from them. And they start building walls and barriers. So you find that instead of becoming one community, we create walls and barriers between us. And some of the walls and barriers are not necessarily borders of nations, but things like patents and copyrights. So that I have invented something which is a benefit for the whole world, but then I want to make money off it, so I put a patent on it and prevent others from copying it or using it. And so I am basically putting a wall or a barrier which prevents the blessing to go out to the other people, and then the other people resent it and they say, why? Now, if you look at, for instance, some of the medical bills which people talk about, where an injection can cost you 1 lakh, believe me, it doesn't cost 1 lakh to manufacture that injection. It probably costs a few hundreds. That's about all. But because of patents and copyrights, you find that these kind of skyrocketing medical costs, which the poorer countries can't afford. And then the resentment starts and people start infringing copyrights and patents and things like that. And in fact, if you look at the early, I think, malarial vaccine was stolen and brought to India. And that is how it prevented the malarial epidemics in India, was basically by a stolen vaccine. Now, we can keep arguing about the ethics of that. But the fact is that when your children are starving, when your children are dying, you're not worried about ethics. At that stage, theft becomes for you justified. It becomes a justified theft. And this creates its own spiral of consequences as people start resenting you because you are stealing from them. And you resent people because they have and you just don't have. And nobody wants to see their children starving or their children struggling with various kinds of illnesses. So what is the solution to that? The one or the solution which some of you have mentioned is this whole question of charity and development. That means the haves have to be willing to share freely with those who don't have. And in fact, I'm a bit wary of charity. I'm a greater believer in what we call development. So that we need to start working for the development of people. Now, a lot of people do development in terms of physical aid. A few do in terms of educational aid. But what I find the real need is psychological aid. And that very little is done actually. And so we need to get involved in helping people to be able to cope and to support themselves so that the barriers can be taken down. Because if people are able to support themselves and look after themselves, they are not going to steal from me and they are not going to attack me. And I can take off the barriers and I can start having what we call some kind of peace. So this is basically how the conflict began. And then we have that statement by Desmond Tutu. He said, do your little bit of good where you are. It is those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world. So what Desmond Tutu is basically saying, listen, when you look at the problems of world peace, you get frightened. You say there's no solution. You want to kind of run away. Either don't run away. You do your little bit of good in terms of charity and development, helping people to cope, so that the tensions in the world reduce. And it is these small goods put together that is going to finally solve the problems of the world. So that is what Desmond Tutu said. Now let me look at what some of the thinkers in the political field have said. Now, the first sign of any kind of political science which came was that of in Greece. Of course, there was in India where Chanakya wrote on politics in the Indian context. But on a world stage, people who tend to talk more about Aristotle and Plato as being the first people who wrote about governance. And they were pushing the Greek form of democratic governance. But that didn't last very long. Believe me, the Greek form of democratic governance probably lasted 100 years. Essentially, society became a dictatorship of the aristocracy. Either it was the king ruling or it was the rich ruling, and they were crushing the poor. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's India, whether it's China, whether it's Europe, whether it is America, all these countries essentially became a dictatorship of the aristocracy, crushing the poor and oppressing the poor and creating a huge class divide across the world. And in Europe, we had the extra dictatorship, not only of the aristocracy, but the dictatorship of the church. And it really destroyed the lives of people and created a huge class divide in society. And this dark ages, as they call it, literally ran for almost 1,500 years or so. Around 1,500 years, I would say. Till what we call the Enlightenment, when people like Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu, they started developing philosophical thought and started speaking about injustice and the need for justice and the equality of all people. They said that the rich and the poor are the same. They are the same blood. They are the same kind of people. And hence there needs to be justice and there needs to be a kind of equality in society. And this led to the French Revolution with its slogan of liberty, equality, and fraternity, where they tried to establish a flat society where people will be equal, there will be liberty, and there will be a fellowship. Anyway, this experiment did not last and it kind of collapsed. So one of the things I think we should learn from all this, violence begets violence. And without any clear idea of power, you are not going to be able to establish any kind of peace, whether it's in your home or whether it's in your country or whether it's in the world. We need to understand what is power, how power is managed, and how power is utilized. Because parents misuse their power and finally it ends up in a war situation with their children. You misuse a power in office and you end up in a war situation with the people. Nations misuse their power, and they also start ending up in tensions around the world. So we need to understand what is power and how it is to be used if we really want to achieve peace. Because if you use violence or you use your power for violence, you're only going to beget more violence. So the communists, after the French Revolution, the communists came up with a theory. Let us share the wealth so that all have the same. So that nobody should be richer or poorer, they should all be the same. And you share the power with the people so that all of them have the same power. And there is nobody is having more power or less power than the other person. So that kind of equality, and then there will not be this kind of tensions and fights within the people. And it was a nice idea, but when they tried to put it into practice, they found that democracy did not seem to work. Because those people who had the money and had the power, they were not willing to share the wealth, and they were not willing to share the power. So they came up with a theory, forcibly removed the ones with wealth and power, and they created more conflict. They made all kinds of prison camps and all kinds of atrocities were done to get rid of the people so that we can start sharing the wealth and share the power. But Lord Acton made a statement, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what happened that even with the communist solution, even though you're supposed to share the power with the people, that did not happen. The power got concentrated in the bureaucracy and the people who were there. And it led to a corruption of the bureaucracy and the corruption of the system. And the differences between the people, both in wealth and power, just increased. And somehow communism didn't seem to be a problem, a solution to the problem. Now, one thing, don't listen to Western propaganda. Communism was very effective. It removed poverty completely. So that was one great thing which communism achieved. Communism made sure that the basics were available to all of society, irrespective of who you are, which was a great thing which communism achieved. But because of the differences in wealth within society and differences of power within the society, the satisfaction was still not there. And a lot of people of unhappiness was there and culture clashes were there. And people were trying to break free. So one of the things I learned from this communist experiment was we need to recognize and use market forces. Why? The market forces essentially reflect human nature. And anything you try to do which goes against the human nature ultimately does not work because human nature gets around it. They try to find ways around it. And you land up in problems like the communists ended up with, that wealth was ultimately not equally distributed and neither was power equally distributed. And I think socialism has done a better job of it than communism did because they use market forces and do not ignore market forces. Second thing, I think we need to recognize the empowerment of responsibility. One of the things I said in the beginning, that as individuals, we need to get into the empowerment business and empower people to be able to look after themselves. So one thing we need to recognize that once a person is given a responsibility, he feels a tremendous sense of empowerment. But what communism was trying to do, that I'll give you your basic needs without you having to do anything, removed responsibility from the people, and so that development kind of slowed down and things did not go the way it should have gone. Only those areas where the government was interested, development took place, but in other areas, it kind of lagged behind. And that was again a liability which came. And the moment these differences come, and as they keep going up, you will find that tension increases and this kind of friction starts increasing within society. I saw somebody putting up their hand. I don't know if you want to ask a question, but I think we'll wait till the end to ask questions rather than taking it now like I normally do in my meetings. Okay. So one of the things I learned from all this, ultimately, there has to be dialogue and discussion. Ronald Reagan makes a statement, peace is not absence of conflict. It is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. So basically, we need to get into this whole business of dialogue, where whenever conflict arises, we're going to go for a dialogue, we're going to discuss, and we're going to see how we can find solutions, rather than trying to force people. See, the mistake which communism made, I feel, was in trying to force people to conform to their ideas. And that doesn't work. And I think socialism did a better job by not forcing people, but by educating people and teaching people to come and support them. Then there was the democratic solution. It began as a Greek experiment and soon collapsed, as I said, because the whole Western world, at least, in fact, the whole world became an oppression of the people by the aristocracy. So Churchill makes this comment: democracy is the worst form of government, except for all others that have been tried. So essentially what Churchill is saying, that democracy is not necessarily a good form of government, but the only form of government that really seems to be fair and just, but it got its own problems. So if you look at Black Lives Matter and other movements in the US and things like that, which have been strongly democratic countries, you'll find that even though democracy is there, it fails to bring peace in many areas. And so the democracy by itself is not a solution to the problem. The only solution is going to be dialogue and empowerment, which is going to bring about that kind of peace which we are looking for. The other problem with democracy is essentially the oppression of the minority by the majority. Because in a democracy, everyone has the same vote, and so the majority kind of dictates terms, and the minority can become victims. And therefore, many constitutions try to protect the minority and give some special status to them, which again is resented by the majority. And so again, it leads to clash and tensions. And then you have again problems which are there. So we can't think of democracy as a solution. We need to think in terms of team building. I keep telling people, distinguish between democracy and team building. In team building, you know what happens. There is a team captain, there is a team code, there is a hierarchy. So it's not a perfect democracy, but there are people who have got more power than others who lead. But they build a fellowship and they build a commitment to each other and they build a trust in each other so that you function as a team. So within a democracy, we need to be working in terms of team building, where the parties which are there are discussing with each other, they are having a dialogue. Okay, I may have lost elections, but I still discuss with the ruling party what should be done and what shouldn't be done. And ideally, that is what really needs to work. But unfortunately, in most countries, whether it is the United States or whether it's India or whether it is any other country, the ruling party, instead of building teams and trying to bring in the other parties to understand what they're doing, they go for confrontation, and that seems to make the situation worse. So one of the things with Albert Einstein makes a statement: peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding. So we need to promote understanding. So wherever we are, whenever you face conflict, may I encourage you to start trying to understand the other person, listen to them, put yourself in their shoes, and then try to get them involved into your team. Even if they are the opposition, tell them that they can be a part of your team and show how we can work together. That is the solution for creating the peace which you're looking for. Even democracy by itself is not going to give you that kind of peace. And then we had Chairman Mao who made the statement, political power grows out of a barrel of a gun. And he kind of felt that you need to create this so much of power with you that nobody dares confront you. So after World War I, they formed a League of Nations, and then after World War II, they formed the United Nations. And frankly, none of them really work, because if you look at the United Nations, it's not democratic. You have the Security Council, and they're permanent, they're not elected. So it is basically an oppression by the winners of the war on the rest of the world. And so that is why there is a lot of resentment as to why should you rule the world and why should we be subservient to you. And then within the Security Council, you find that these people start making unholy alliances. So if we go to Africa, you will find the Chinese are everywhere. giving aid to all the governments. Why? Because there are 52 countries in Africa, and US has not been showing much interest in Africa. So they get 52 votes in the United Nations from these African countries supporting them. So you find that this kind of, instead of the working and bringing about peace, you find it's creating a kind of a political warfare which engulfs the whole world and seems to achieve ultimately nothing. Essentially because there's no democracy, and democracy is the best of a bad forms of government, and it is just not there. So people went for what we call weapons of mass destruction. They said, if I have a big enough a bomb, nobody's going to attack me or fight with me because I can destroy them with one bomb. And so this is what they call a nuclear detente, that because we have all got enough bombs to wipe the other person off, nobody's going to attack us. But what actually it did, it pushed the battle underground. Okay, and there was the just war and its arguments that I don't want to go into that. A lot of people try to argue that war is just in some cases, and so we should fight just wars. I don't want to get into that. But what this weapons of mass destruction really did, it pushed everything below ground. So now if I want to attack you, I can't attack you openly because you will destroy me with a weapon of mass destruction. So I armed terrorists in your country, I armed rebels in your country, I armed discontent, I finance them. And so you fight proxy wars. And the number of proxy wars which are now taking place, they kind of skyrocketed, but nobody wants to face each other in a full-scale large war. I think the last two countries which fought a full-scale large war was Armenia and Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan bombed Armenia out of existence almost, so that Armenia withdrew. So we find that this weapon of mass destruction by itself, which at that time they thought would create peace, did not. It only pushed the war underground. And then what do we learn from all this? One of the things I learned from all this, that as long as we are in a competition and a rat race, we are never going to be happy, and we are going to be continuously in warfare with the people around us. Peter's principle said that you will get promoted till you reach a level of incompetence. And because of that, all of us finally reach a position where we are unhappy because we are not getting promoted any longer, or we are not having the regard any longer. And the question I ask is, can we drop out of this competition and the rat race? But if you really want peace, you need to drop out of this rat race. And I'm not going to be a part of this rat race. I'm going to serve mankind. I'm going to build mankind. I'm going to empower mankind. And I'm not going to get involved in this rat race. And then only you will find that you can start thinking in terms of peace, at least where you are. And you can start promoting peace everywhere. So can we build and not compare and not compete? Now that means even as a nation, I should not be comparing myself with other nations, but I need to be seeing how I can build other nations and how I can help them. Now you'll find out of World War II, America seemed to be helping a lot of countries, but most of them you'll find that it was kind of loaded in American favor. They did not give us the pure help which we needed. And that is why it created a lot of resentment. So we need to get involved in building and not comparing and not competing with others, but loving people. So when the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. So this is where everyone who discusses and understands peace will tell you, you need to give up the love of power, because understanding power and its use and misuse is what is going to help you establish the peace which you need. But you need to have the power of love. And I think there's an American singer called Jimi Hendrix who makes this solution statement. So we look at the Christmas solution, right? Jesus Christ came as the son of a very poor family and a very weak family and a very vulnerable family. So that's what God does as an example to us, that you want peace, make yourself vulnerable. Don't acquire power so that you're the most powerful guy around and who can bully others. Rather, give up your power and make yourself vulnerable. By being born in a weak family, Jesus associated with the weak, not the strong, not with the kings, not with the high priests, not with the people in power, but with the weak. And believe me, if you want to promote peace in your department, in your workplace, you want to promote peace in your home, you want to promote peace anywhere, start associating with the weak, not with the strong. And you'll be surprised how things will start changing when you associate yourself with the weak. If you look at a European structure, it's very interesting. Like if you go to Sweden and sit in a suburban train, you might find a prime minister of Sweden sitting next to you. Angela Merkel, who was the German chancellor, she continued to live in the same house she was living in before she became chancellor. And after she stepped down from being chancellor, she continued in the same house. See, this is what I'm saying. When you are no longer trying to acquire power, not trying to acquire wealth, not trying to acquire status, but just trying to be a blessing to people. And that is the example which they have set us for us to follow. Unfortunately, that's not an example many people try to accept. You know what? This is one of my definitions, and I checked it with the Psychology Today journal, and they agreed with me. They said that it is a form of insanity to be obsessed with self. So I put it this way: sanity is where you have an overwhelming concern for others, and insanity is when you are an obsession with self. When you want to come first in class, you're obsessed to do well, you're obsessed to get promotions, you're obsessed to succeed, is ultimately a form of insanity. It only destroys peace. But when you give up all this and then start focusing on others, how you can help others, how you can build others, and how you can make others achieve in their lives, that is sanity. And you'll be promoting world peace wherever you are. So we need to realize I'm here to bless. And bless means to meet the real needs of people, not just their felt needs. I'm here to build teams, that I'm going to dialogue and talk to people. I'm going to empower people. I'm not going to use the power I have to force people, but I'm going to dialogue with them, understand them, and see if I can build a team where they cooperate with me rather than trying to use my power on them. I'm here to exercise my power and love. Today, they teach in most management colleges servant leadership, but very few people practice it. So I have got power. I got power given to me to be a leader, but I'm going to use that power as a servant to help people and to build people. And let me end with this. Not one of us can rest, be happy, be at home, be at peace with ourselves until we end hatred and division. John Lewis, civil rights activist from the United States. I'll just leave you with this to ponder over.